What is the creepiest thing that's happened to you personally that made you question reality? One morning I woke up to my alarm going off at 6:30 as usual and got up and cooked breakfast. As soon as I sat down to eat, my alarm went off again and I woke up in bed. I dreamed that I woke up and went about my morning routine. That was easily the most disorienting thing I've ever experienced. I'm a tar in our college's anatomy class, which takes place in the cadaver lab, dead bodies. Late one night, I'm working alone in the cadaver lab and I start to hear a noise. It's hard to tell what the noise sounds like, but it's a consistent muffled noise. So I kind of walk around the room and locate it. Now normally the bodies are all kept in these big metal crates, but at the time we had one more body than we did crate. So one body was in a plastic body bag and that's where the noise was coming from. So I'm terrified at this point, all alone in the lab, looking down at this plastic body bag, that I can see the outline of the body, that presumably is coming back to life, because it is definitely making noise. I stood over this body for a solid minute, debating whether I should open the bag, and finally the noise just stops. I got all my stuff together, and bolted from the lab. A couple weeks later, the professor tells me to be careful if I ever work on that body, because there is a live pacemaker in it, so don't cut into that, and it will vibrate and ring every few hours. If it's low on battery, I'll let out the biggest sigh of relief that we weren't haunted. Once woke up to the sound of heavy breathing and felt as if I was being watched. I couldn't move for a while either. Then I just blurted out my dog's name and kept calling for him. He didn't run over, and as soon as I could get myself to move I went looking for him. Found him sitting in the kitchen doorway, just staring straight forward. I started calling him from right behind him, and he wouldn't even turn around. Then I touched his back, and he turned to glance at me, but went right back to his trance. A year or so after the fact, I found out that the first thing was probably sleep paralysis. Not too sure about what was going on with the dog though. My friend was about to clean his gun, and it was pointed directly at me when it went off. For a few seconds we stood there in shock, him thinking he killed me and me in a state of pure panic. Afterwards we found the bullet embedded in a wall beside me. I will never let him live that shit down. Fucking auditory hallucinations. Fuck those. Was driving down a rural really dark road at night. I'm super sleep deprived. Drunk several of those 240 milligrams caffeine Monster energy drinks. I didn't have the radio on, so it was pretty quiet. Then the whispering started. I'm confused, don't understand what it is. Try to focus on it. Is my stereo not all the way off? Then it started mumbling louder. Fuck, this ain't good. Then I hear a very clear turn here, but my GPS says continue for 12 miles. Hahaha, fuck that. Nope, fuck that. I turn radio on really loud and continue home. Next physical I mention it to document. Am I insane? Both sleep deprivation and caffeine have been known to induce auditory hallucinations individually. Combining both, it's perfectly normal to hear things. If it happens again, come back in. Thought I was going mental. Not necessarily creepy, but definitely made me question reality. I used to work in a gas station. One regular customer was like night and day. One day he'd be soft-spoken and shy. The next he'd be obnoxious. His cigarette preference also changed from day to day, but he always came in the same work truck with the same guys at the same time of day. One day, he walked in and went straight to the bathroom. A minute later, he walked in again and came to the counter. Twins. It took me 8 months to realize they were twins. And not even identical twins either. They just looked really similar. My wife and I had a 2-hour drive back from Street Louis to our home, during which both of us lost time. Woke up 3 hours later, still an hour and a half away from home, only having used enough gas to go that half hour, and our GPS showed we had been driving our normal route. We still have no fucking idea what happened, but we know we hadn't pulled over, and that neither of us had any memory between taking an exit and seeing this ONW particular billboard for a restaurant we always pass. Still freaks me the fuck out. My significant other and I are from different states, but we used to vacation at the same location. Saw what I believe to be myself at middle school age in the back of one of their pictures. There was an old man who lived on the road I drove every day to get to the highway. He sat on his front porch drinking his morning coffee, and he always waved at me when I drove by, and I always waved back. This went on for the better part of a decade. One day I was taking to my neighbor about how much Mr. So and so waving made my morning awesome, and I was glad he was still kicking around. My neighbor says, wait, what? He has been dead for 3 years. Never saw him again. Who was I waving at? I had 2 bananas, connected at the stem part, broke them into 2, ate one, threw out the peel, came back for the other one and it's gone. I live alone. Either I have a rotting banana somewhere in my apt, or I've gone crazy. Update, it's been weeks. Haven't seen/smelled the other banana. I'll accept that I just went bananas for that moment. Woke up to my granddad, stood by the door staring at me. Scared the shit out of me, and there was a flash, and he was gone. He's been dead about 7 or 8 years at that point. I asked my mum, she said yeah, he often did that. He'd wake my nan up for work by knocking on the window. I was driving back home at night a couple of weeks ago, and I passed a sign that stated a town was coming up. This town is 10 miles from my hometown. The sign said it was 10 miles. So I continue driving. I drive 10 miles, don't see the exit, look up and see the sign that said the town is 10 miles away. It was like I hadn't moved. I went past the same exit again too. No one believes me. When I was just old enough to not need a childminder after school, I was home alone one summer's day. My parents, who would not be back until later, made me promise to lock the door and not answer the door to strangers. I did this religiously, as I was also anxious about being in the house by myself. There was a hefty bolt on our front door, and I was to make sure I used it. I would see my folks come home and know to unlock it. So I'm in the house, playing with Lego upstairs. I hear the unmistakable sound of the front door open and close. I even felt the percussive thud that was so familiar as the door closed. Thinking one of my parents must have come home early, I went down to greet them. No one there. I then saw the bolt was still across. Now my blood runs cold as I start racing through the possibilities to explain this. I check all doors and windows in panic. All locked. It was a standard 4-bedroom family house, not a mansion. Easily checked. I'm alone in the house. So how the fuck is the bolt across? Impossible to open that door from the outside, key or no key. I'm sure it was the door I heard. The house was silent, and it was a very loud and distinctive noise. It did not compute. I noped out of there fast and went to a friend's house. He did not believe me and was certain I was winding him up. Edit. Well, this is the 4th or 5th time I've posted this answer. First time it's gotten attention. Some clarification. I'm in the UK. Childminder is commonly used if you are a child. It's only babysitter if you're a baby. How some of you got something sexual out of this term is disturbing. No basement, no banging pipes. House was in good order. It was summer, so no heating system on anyway. It's a UK summer, so no account or open windows. The house was fully detached and at the end of a quiet street. The door was a solid wood affair, locked with a Yale lock and the bolt I mentioned. No other door in the house made the noise this one did. All internal doors had draft strips, and with carpet these couldn't waft about in the wind. I do not think it was supernatural. Maybe I did then, but I was a kid. Likely some brain fart hallucination. When I was a kid between 8 or 9, I used to wake up every night to headlights coming through my bedroom window. The lights would stop and turn off, not as if a car drove by, but as if they were turned off. Then the long shadows of a man, as if were looking through my window, would pass by and stop in front of my window. I would lay really still and pretend nothing happened every night for months. Eventually I convinced myself it was imagination. Now that I think back, it stopped when my stepdad moved in. My mom was single, but I was convinced it wasn't real. Across the street lived my best friend whose mom was also single, and she refused to sleep in her bedroom. Her window faced my window. She told me years later it was because every night a man would park in her side yard and walk over to my yard. The long shadows were from the light in her yard. She eventually decided it was my dad checking on us and never told me until I was a teenager. It wasn't my dad, I asked him. So I thought I was crazy and hallucinating for years, and perhaps I wasn't, or 2 kids were odd dreams at the same time every night. By my hometown there was a hiking trail that people went to very infrequently. It was along the side of the Niagara Escarpment, So it had some climbable cliffs and some very shallow caves that you could crawl around on. I went with some friends when I was 19/20 and we were crawling around and found a cave that went pretty deep. We had never been in there before, had never even seen it before. So we pushed forward and decided to check it out, even though we had no flashlights, and this was when cell phones didn't really have a flashlight function. We stepped into the cave and it was easily 20 to 30 degrees cooler than outside. Upon looking around with which light we had, we noticed it was really clean inside the cave, as in it didn't have beer cans littered everywhere like all the other small caves did. While in there we got a really eerie feeling after being in there shortly, hearing weird and strange things, feeling like we were being touched, poked and pulled, and not having any way to figure out who was doing it because it was too dark. We were just using lighters to see what was around us. We were convinced one of us was messing with the others. Although anytime we sparked up a lighter, we were all decently far apart. We decided to hightail it out of there after only a few minutes, convinced to come back with flashlights. We came out to see that it was now dusk outside. When we entered it was midday. Somehow we had lost roughly 3 hours inside of this cave. We went back with flashlights the next week, but have never been able to find this cave again.